All right, we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. So we'll let some people get logged in. For those of us that are watching it live, if you want to go ahead and just do a quick introduction and tell us where you're from, we can go ahead and just get a quick introduction where it's how it's tell us where you're from, and if you have questions, you can enter them in on the comments field. I'm just gonna having a login problem on my one computer, but we'll get started. If you're watching this afterwards and not live, you may want to skip ahead maybe 5-10 minutes, and we'll get started while we collect questions. So just hang up, and we see questions coming in. My name is Greg Undo. I'm presenting from Northern Virginia area in the United States. So please feel free to introduce yourself, and we'll get started in just a couple minutes. All right, good to see Jace online. Good to see Sal. We have Massachusetts, Saginaw, Michigan. All right, we have Hamburg, Germany represented. Latvia, Colombia. West Palm Beach. Okay, we have Spain. We have UK. We have Quebec. I'm just going to start copying over some questions, and we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. All right, just copying over questions. We'll get started in just a little bit. All right, so we have Italy. Thanks for all the great questions that are coming in. All right, we have Sweden. We have Colorado, Norway. All right, so we have Tom from Virginia. He's a Virginian as well. So, Tom, where are you based out of in Virginia? I'm in Northern Virginia. All right, so we have Mexico, Ireland. All right, we have Ecuador, the Ayland Islands. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. I apologize. All right, we have Melbourne. It's a beautiful city. We have Finland, Serbia. We have Danny from Alabama. I used to live in Huntsville when I was a little kid. St. Augustine. We have Taiwan. We have Paris. We had a comment for going through the preferences in detail. That would probably take a couple of hangouts. But if there's any particular preferences that you want me to go over, we'll kind of go through some of them today. Turn my phone off again. Sorry. All right, so we have Ludwigshafen. I'm probably saying that totally wrong. Germany. We have British Columbia, Netherlands. Good to see you online, Taylor Sapp. All right, so we have Russia. All right, we have Brooklyn, New York. Rhode Island. All right, so we have Stockton, Dusseldorf. just getting some more questions collected here. Get started in just a couple minutes. Thanks for everyone's patience and great questions coming in. All right, we'll just get a couple more questions in and we'll get started. Thanks for your patience. All right, so we have Russia, Long Island, Paris again. All right, so we have Portugal. We had a question about a WaveLab Hangout, so maybe we'll try to do one in April. If you guys want to do another one, yeah, we should do another WaveLab Hangout. All right, so we have Korea. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So we had some questions that were sent in advance. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of those. So one of the questions that was sent in was a way to quickly, a different way of doing fades, like fade ins and fade outs with a particular like audio selection, other than having to, let's say if you're doing it for multiple files, to select all the files and then be able to kind of grab this handle. So here we could do a fade out. Conversely, we can do a fade in. So there's a number of different options that you can kind of use to do this. If you wanted to have the range selection tool, you could also just kind of select different, and I believe if we could actually just, there's a fades to range selection. So if you just wanted to adjust the fades to the range, you could just, if you wanted to just select the beginning here and then hit the letter A, and you could also do that just on the backside like that. So, and again, that's just the letter A for your keyboard shortcut, and we can find that under your audio. You could also have your cursor. So if you have your cursor set to there, we could adjust to fade in to the cursor, or conversely fade out to the cursor. But one option that a lot of people aren't aware of, and it's not a standard preference that could also be super fast, is if you have the event selected here, what you're able to do is if you go to your preferences and under editing of audio, you could use, there's this little function where you could choose to use the mouse wheel for event volume and fades. So if you have that chosen and clicked right there, what you could do is now anytime that you have like if you have different audio files that are selected on your project window, at this point we could just use our mouse scroll wheel to adjust the volume. So that could be very fast. So if you wanted to just select this and adjust the clip gain volume, so that can make it very quick. But in relation to fades, if I wanted to have all these selected, I could just hold down the shift key. And if I'm over to the left-hand side and use my scroll wheel, at this point, I could just scroll in and do fades using my mouse scroll wheel. Or if I'm on kind of the tail end, the right side, I could use my mouse scroll wheel to just do fade outs. So that's a very easy way. So you say, okay, I just want to do a fade out of these two clips. I could adjust the gain of the selected clips or hold down the shift key. And if I wanted to, if I didn't mess up, hold down the shift key, I could adjust just the fades that easily if you hover over the event and not on a timeline like I just did. So those are some other ways of doing some fades that may not be as apparent, so that you don't have to go through here, find a corner, and adjust a fade. That can speed up your workflow pretty easily. Okay, so let's go ahead, and we had some other questions that were sent in. Let me just scroll up to them. Okay, so we had a question emailed in from Nick saying that whenever he clicks on his media, that it just takes a long time for it to load up. So, you know, mine seems pretty reasonably quick. So if I just kind of come here, I could just kind of see all of my media just like that. You know, make sure that, you know, you're kind of keeping up. If you go into your media bay, a couple things that might kind of, you know, there's probably some settings where, you know, if, you know, figure out how many items you actually want to see in your list. If you have that set to like, you know, 1 million items or 100,000 items, that may take a little bit longer. And, you know, there's some settings here. And again, if you don't see this, if you go to kind of the setup window, you want to go to the left-hand corner, go to like the little settings or like the little cog wheel. And there's some different settings here that you may want to check, like these definitely about scan folders only when media bay is open. So that way it could be scanning kind of in the background. Make sure that that is unchecked. And then, you know, if you wanted to only go into, you know, browse, you know, selected folders or hide folders. So there's some different preferences in here that I would investigate to see if that would kind of speed up your workflow with that. But, you know, I think mine is pretty, you know, it's not instantaneous when I kind of just pop home, or if I jump from my control room and say, okay, I just wanted to come here and find, you know, different audio files. I could just, you know, that seems pretty reasonable. And it's just a MacBook Pro with, you know, the standard solid state drive. So while it's not a slow hard drive, you know, it seems pretty reasonable to me. So check once again, if you go into your media menu to media bay and go to the settings that you have, try experimenting and check these three and see if that will make a difference for you. And also, if you don't necessarily have every single folder in your computer selected to be searched for through your media bay. What you want to do is to, it could be, maybe you have entire hard drives of photos and you don't need that to be scanned as well. So you could actually pick and choose exactly which audio folder or which folders that you want the media bay to search through as well. So that could speed up kind of the responsiveness to it. Okay, so just reading through a couple comments and we'll move on to one of the next questions. So we had a question about the Cubase IC Pro. And the IC Pro is kind of a remote control app that works in conjunction with Cubase. So it's available for iOS devices. So it's kind of ideal for like an iPad. And there was an iOS update that kind of broke the communications with that. So if you had it before and it was working, and then perhaps it was an iOS update that occurred on your iPad, and then it suddenly stopped working. The later versions of the Cubases have been the later versions of the iOS have kind of brought it back to life, where the issue that was causing the problem was resolved. So you should be okay. Just make sure that you actually download the latest iOS drivers, the latest iOS version, as well as the latest version of the app. And I think you should be all squared away with that. Okay, just going through comments here. Okay, so it's kind of just scroll. I'm going to scroll down in my list of questions here. Okay, so we had a question regarding how to actually determine the range of time, like how long a particular section of time is, like between two locators, was the question that was emailed in. So let's say if I have some markers in my particular project here. So I'm going to add a marker track. So the customer wanted to know the difference in time between two different markers. So if we have a marker track here, one of the things that you could do is if you wanted to select the range between like two marker tracks, all you'd really have to do is to just double click, and you could on the marker tracks with the range selection tool, and you could select the entire range once you do that. So once we have that selected, we could see from the info line here, we can see the range start and the range end time. And then this would actually show us the range length indicated directly here. So if I wanted to just double click, we can see that this is 8.638 milliseconds. Or that's 8 seconds. You're 8.638 seconds. And if I double click here, we could see the actual range length indicated here. So we see that we started at 33 seconds and then we go to 52 seconds. So it shows us 19 seconds. Now you may run into situations where it may show that value in bars and beats in Cubase by default. And if it does that, all you would need to do is to switch your master timeline here on your transport. So you could just simply click right here and have your master timeline switch to seconds, or you could just right click on your timeline here, So if you just right click directly in the timeline, you could switch that to seconds, and that would be your primary time format. So if you needed to know the exact time, maybe for a cue for a jingle or an advertisement, just double click here and you could look in the range selection tool. So if you always work with bars and beats, what you could do also, if you wanted to switch those, if you go under the transport, and at this point, you're going to have, let's say if we go to, let me just find where the preference is. And there's also just a, if you go to transport, to the transport menu, you could also exchange, because you could have kind of a primary and secondary display. So if you wanted to just exchange the time formats, and I don't think there's a keyboard shortcut set up for that. But if you wanted to go to your key commands at this point, once you get to your key commands, you could just type in exchange time. And then you could assign your own keyboard shortcut. So if you wanted to find the exact amount of time between two particular sections, really all you'd have to do is to just double click, select with the range tool between two locators, and from the actual info line here, you could see exactly the range, the length of that selected range. All right, so let's scroll through a couple comments here. All right, some of our people joined in from Switzerland and India. It's great. All right, so let me just go through some other questions. We had a question. I know I saw a comment on more vocals, less beats. But we had a question on doing kind of match quantizing of different drums to different like MIDI drums to audio loops, etc. So let's say if I have a particular MIDI drum part that's kind of laid out like this, we'll just go ahead and solo just some MIDI drums. All right, and I'll adjust my hardware settings here so we have a little less reverb on that. Sorry about that. Let me just... All right, let's see if it'll just kind of play back. All right, so let's say at this point, if I have a particular groove going on in my MIDI drums, and I wanted to have the feel, I wanted to match that up with the feel of a drum loop. So what we're going to do is now just, we have a drum loop here. So let's say I'll just... So what we want to do now is to actually just kind of, I'm going to what I want to do is to figure out what the feel of the actual drums, the drum loop is, and I wanted to apply that to the audio file itself. So if I double click, we can now go directly into our sample editor. I'm going to select my hit points tab. So when we come here, we can see what I want to do is to go to my hit points. And if these aren't quite lining up together, so let's say we listen to it. Where it's not quite as tight as we would want. So what I'm going to do is I'll just double click here. We'll go into our edit hit points. And at this point, we'll just adjust our threshold to kind of catch all the little different parts of the groove. And we're going to say create groove. And this now shows up as a preset. So what I'm going to do now is just simply take this particular groove, and I'm going to use that groove from the drum loop directly on the audio file itself. So I'm just going to come here and hit the letter Q. So when we look at the particular MIDI drums here, when I hit Q, we can see that each of the MIDI notes is shifted, so that if I did everything correctly, that when we play, that the feel from the drum loop has been applied, that groove, to the MIDI data. So, and on this MIDI part, I think I have just the quantizer plugin. So now we can listen to it. And at this point, we could go, if we click on this little icon directly to the right of that, we could, if we really like that particular feel for a pattern, at this point, we could just click directly here and store and save that preset, so we could call it up and quantize other elements to a particular swing. So if there's a particular groove that you really like from a song, you can load it in and kind of extract the groove of it and save it as a preset, and then you're able to quantize other audio or other MIDI files kind of based upon that actual groove. So it gets to be a very powerful way of extracting the feel from an audio file into your MIDI editing and your MIDI performance, and have it lock right up to that feel. All right, so we had a question about with the Steinberg download assistant, getting the Grand downloaded. So I think I opened up the download assistant here. And so I just went to kind of the absolute 3, and then, from here, you could download the Grand, and it seems that the customer is having problems getting the whole file downloaded. But I've done it on 6 or 7 different computers in the last few months with this method, and I didn't have any problems. So I know maybe indicated that, you may have to start over again, but, perhaps it's, I'm not sure if it's a particular, download stream of your internet connection, or perhaps your computer is timing out, or if you're doing the whole download. But I think in this case that you can, I could be mistaken on this, but you can contact your local Steinberg distributor if you want it through their support to get an actual DVD. I know I've seen the Grand 3 on DVD, so sometimes the support department may be able to, if you contact them, they may be able to ship out a direct installer or provide kind of an alternative download location. But I know that I've done this 6 or 7 times kind of without issue. So something to kind of check out. So sorry if you're having problems with that. The next question we had was in dealing with, so we had a question in Hallian, and someone wanted to know how to import in like a contact file. So I think that Halion will be able to download any of, we'll be able to import any of the contact files that aren't copy protected, that don't have kind of the copy protection in them, because we wanted to respect the copy protection of different content developers. But to load in third-party libraries, if you have the ISO or the media, just simply go over here. And then once you're kind of in the browser, all you'd have to do is to really direct your actual, wherever you have that media, and then you could mount that particular media. So a lot of the contact libraries are going to be copy protected. So those, we don't, do anything nefarious to, to circumvent copy protection, because, we can value intellectual property. But that's how you could do it with other sample content, such as, Kurzweil, Akai, Emu, the content. So you would just simply direct it here. So, go to within Halion to load and into browser. And then at that point, just simply direct it to wherever you have those files. And then you should be able to mount that directly inside of your Halion, and then save it. All right. So we had a question about, is there a fast way to duplicate a track? So where you could say, I think the question was duplicate it 10 times, duplicate it 12 times, something like that. So let me just come here. So, there's the duplicate tracks function. And let's see if there's just a key command for that. So there is, under the project menu, you could say duplicate tracks. So let's just say if I wanted to assign a key command, let's see if this one is available. I'll try Command Shift D. No, it's already being used. So let me try Command Option D. All right, let me just see if I could sign that real quick. I'll try this one more time. Sorry, just operator error on my part. All right, so I'm just going to do Control Shift D. So while it doesn't do it, you know, you can just do that key command. So while it may not do it, you know, where you could punch in n times, you know, however many times that you want, just simply come here and you could assign it to a key command. And then if you wanted to, you could go to the key commands, and if you say, okay, I do this like a vocal thing, I want to duplicate it like 5 times or 10 times, you could just simply assign a macro where you could just say duplicate 5 times. So we'll just say here, duplicate 5 times. And then at this point, you could just add that command like that. And let's say we'll undo these. So at this point, I could just have my macro, and we'll say duplicate track 5 times. And just like that. So while it's not the same exact functionality, I think you could work with the key commands and the macros to get the same result very quickly, and probably the same amount of mouse clicks. All right, so seeing a question, you know, someone is on Cubase 8.5 with Windows 10, and it gets to near the end and it's not starting. So Cubase doesn't launch. One thing to try is to make sure you have the latest e-licenser download. So the e-licenser program is kind of what handles the license management. And depending on which version of Windows 10, one of the recent, I think the Creators update, if I'm not mistaken, may have you know, updating the particular you know, license control center, the e-licenser, and you can find it on the Steinberg website, or if you go to elicenser.net, that will do it. But there's also kind of a diagnostic mode that you could run with Cubase, and if you hold down like Alt Control Shift or Command Option Shift, you'll get this little mode here. So I'll just launch kind of an older version just to kind of show this. So hold down Alt Control Shift or Command Option Shift. And then if you wanted to, you could disable the program preferences. At times, different things can cause program preferences to get corrupted, but this would allow you to disable the program preferences, to delete them, or just use the current settings. So before the program starts. So that's kind of a, if you hold down Alt Control Shift or Command Option Shift, that will get you into that diagnostic mode. So we'll just use our current ones here, and I'll just erase that. But those are some things to try. If your program isn't booting all the way up, sometimes, and you know, sometimes it could be a plugin that's causing the problems. But I would check to make sure that the e-licenser is set to the latest version, and then if that's still not working, try starting it in kind of a diagnostic mode and see if that makes a difference here as well. So let me just get rid of this in just a second, since I have kind of the later version open. And let me make sure it's the right one. Okay. Okay, so let's go through some other questions. Okay, so we had a question about removing multiply selected channels. So let's see if we could do that instead of doing it one at a time. So let's say I'll just duplicate the particular ones I just did. So let's say I just wanted to get rid of all of these. So I think if you just right click and just say remove selected tracks. So at that point, boom, you could just do it like that. So even if I'll just do it on one of the other projects that I had open up here earlier. So activate this. And let's say I just wanted to keep the top 2 tracks there. So I'll just right click in the track column here and say remove selected tracks. And that way they're gone. So just that easy. So I think that's kind of what you're looking to do. I'm just going to reread the question before we leave this topic. Yeah, so I think that's that should be that kind of covers a question. If I misunderstood something, just let me know. All right, so we had a question on kind of punch in and punch out and some different monitoring options. So let's go ahead and let me just open up a quick project here. All right, so we'll get to some vocals for people who are waiting for vocals here. So let's say
you stare at the ground, not a sound. Tell me why.
So let's say I wanted to do a quick punch in where she's saying, "Tell me why."
Tell me why. Tell me why.
Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to actually just select the range selection tool. Now, what people would often get into is, let's say if we wanted to just kind of zoom in just a little more, and let's say I just wanted to punch in that particular point there. So if we have that particular point, what a lot of people used to do is to just hit the letter P, and that automatically set the left and right locators around the event. And we could use that to set up kind of our punch in and punch out. So we could set up your punch in on your kind of older transport. I'll hide that, but you could also just hit like I and O. So as we do this, if I wanted to punch in on that particular section, and I would just select that particular channel. And when I have this selected, and let's say armed for record, that would help, sorry. So, but the question gets to be, you could also kind of set up a different way of monitoring. So I probably in my transport, so I'll just do this. So we're going to take our punch point. So now let's say I play this. So sorry about that. I'll just. And then you could have it kind of punch out. So if you wanted to do kind of like a cycle mode, you could do that. So if I was doing a quick punch in, there's a couple different ways. So the older way of doing it, if you have previous versions, was to use the left and right locators. So as soon as I do this, it's going to punch. And I'm going to actually just turn off this cycle. So I'm just going to click here. So we could have the punch. That's going to do the punch out. But in version 8.5, they added something called punch points. So what punch points will allow you to do is, let's say I wanted to give the singer just a little more context. So I wanted to set the cycle marker like this. So now I could have but I only wanted to punch this particular phrase. What I could do now is, there's a function under the transport, and we have punch points. So first thing we want to do is to uncheck lock punch points to the locators. And once that's done, I go to my punch points, and we can say, set punch points to the selection range. And we see this little red dot right here, these two red dots. So that indicates our punch in and our punch out. So if I wanted to cycle, but still only punch the particular phrase, now I'll just hit play. And the punch out, and then it's going to cycle. So we could just simply kind of do multiple passes. Now, one of the questions I got, and I just kind of posted a video on this on my Q&A series on the Cubase YouTube channel. But one of the questions that we often get is, as we do this, and we want to set up the punch points, and sometimes the people want to hear what was already there until they're singing, and then they want to hear the pre-existing track afterwards. And a lot of people are commenting like, oh, such a nuisance to turn the monitoring on and off manually to do that. And that's really just a preference. So if you go to your Cubase, and let's say you go to your preferences under VST, the auto monitoring style by default is set to manual. Just simply select this as tape machine style. And then when you go to tape machine style, that will automatically just do the monitoring kind of as you would expect it. So if I have this turned on, it will, as we play, I think we'll see the monitoring kind of kick in. So the monitoring kicks in when it goes into record, and when it punches out, the monitoring goes off like that. So tape machine style is probably the monitoring mode that you want. And so it's one of the first things I do every time I get a fresh Cubase install in a system for people, is I just go to the preferences, and then I just go to VST and choose tape machine style monitoring. And at that point, it kind of works. You don't have to think about it as much, and that will solve a lot of the monitoring issues during kind of punch-ins and punch-outs and tracking. I know people said they were finding it faster to create a different track and then move the audio in. And I think it's really just kind of a misunderstanding of some of the monitoring preferences. So you could have the punch in and punch out tied to the left and right locators. And you could do that from your transport punch points. You could lock that, but if that's unchecked, you could just set an independent range for your punch in point. So it's not tied to a cycle. So you could give more of a context to the punch in. And if you wanted the monitoring to kind of make sense for the singer, at this point, go to your VST menu, and under auto monitoring, select tape machine style. And I think those three things will make kind of your punch in workflow, or your workflow for doing punch ins and punch outs, very easy. All right, so we had a question, can one make harmony parts without a chord track or without a MIDI part. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove the selected tracks here. So I'm going to, at this point, just say, let's remove my chord track. So as soon as I do that, and let's say I just want to, let me just take my punch in and punch out off. Sorry about that. And again, you can activate the punch in by hitting the letter I, punch out by hitting the letter O on your computer keyboard. So good handy keyboard shortcuts to mention. All right, so if we wanted to create a harmony on a particular phrase, let's take that same phrase. What I'm going to do is just kind of select it. And the question was, how can we create a harmony without a MIDI track and without a chord track? And yes, you could do it. So let's see what the results are here. So I'm going to let's do a 4-part harmony. And when you're doing this, the program really kind of has to guess as to exactly what is going on musically within your project. So we'll go to your audio menu and we'll say generate harmony voices. So let's have it do 4 harmony voices. And we'll see if this kind of makes sense musically to what we're hoping to do. So we'll play it back and see if it lines up musically. All right, so if we wanted to listen to each of those, we'll just mute some of the harmony parts here. So we'll mute just, let's say, our soprano. So that was okay. Let's try the alto harmony. All right, so that doesn't make sense. All right, musically, let's try the tenor. Not so good. And so the bass isn't so bad. So, you know, it's going to make more musical sense, you know, and you don't have to necessarily have the chord track or, you know, a piano part. But even if you kind of have a sense of what the chords are. So as soon as I come here, I could just say, okay, we're going to generate harmonies, and it's going to figure it out based on the actual chord track that's present. So now we'll just have it generate the vocal harmonies like so. So we'll just come here. Now it has a kind of musical reference. So I could add my 4 harmony parts like so. And as we do this, we can play. And we know that those different voices will be correct harmonically with the chords. So, so while you can, you know, physically do it, I know a lot of people do the vocal harmonies. They're like, oh, it doesn't sound right, and it has no reference point. And that's a great use of the actual chord track to give yourself that musical reference point, so that, you know, when you're doing stuff like that, that it's going to be actually correct musically, you know. So if, you know, typing in one chord can save you, like, you know, 20 minutes of editing vocal harmonies that are just wrong. So that's kind of an easy way to accomplish your thing. So yes, you can create harmonies without it, but it may give you a lot more work down the road. So, you know, if you just have an audio file, you know, just see if someone could, you know, that if someone's you recorded or someone you mixed, or just kind of work out what the chords are of the song. Doing that throughout the song could save you a lot of time for other editing tasks as well. Okay, let's go on to next question. All right, so we had a question. I just got this question this week from kind of famed engineer Elliot Shiner, who's famous for all of his amazing discography of work. And he was running into where he was, I think, set to a particular time reference. And the question is about it's when I use a scissors tool that it's not cutting exactly where I want it to cut. So let's say, and this could tie directly into your snap values. I'm just going to reread the question and make sure I'm reading it correctly here. Okay, so it's saying, so show two things. So one of the things that people often miss is how important the snap value is to a particular edit. So let's say if I'm here and I have my snap set to bar, and you could turn snap on and off by hitting the letter J on your computer keyboard. So that's snap. And as we want it to come here, you may notice that when I cut, if I wanted to cut in the middle here, that I have my snap value set to bar. So my grid type here is set to bar. So it's only going to allow me to cut at the bar. I can't cut anywhere in between. And then we also have our beat. So now I can only cut on beats 1, and this piece we're in 6/8. So I could only kind of do it on the beat, but I can't cut anywhere in between. So when people want to do just a quick, edit on one particular thing, maybe take a breath out, So what some people often do is just kind of set the snap and just turn it off. So once snap is off, you can freely cut anywhere that you like. So you could just say, oh, this was really annoying. Let me just get rid of that particular phrase. So, but if the snap was disabled, at that point, I couldn't really cut. And this kind of goes into other areas as well. So if I wanted to select my range and my snap is set to beat, at that point, I can't select smaller than the range. So that is often kind of problematic for some people, and it's really often just hitting the letter J to adjust the snap being on or off. So as you do this, also so you could have it set to bar, beat, or quantized value. But if we right click and we have seconds as our primary time display, we could do it in 1 millisecond, 10 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, or 1,000 milliseconds. If you go into SMPTE time code, you could have it be, half a frame, 1 frame, subframe. So depending upon your actual, reference for your master time, you can go down to a single sample if you wanted to. So, but these different grid types, these grid resolution choices will be based on a currently active, a division of the currently active master time format. So, now also the question it asked, like it was maybe jumping around when you cut. So, in 9.5, there's also, we could do a function called adapt to zoom. So if I'm kind of zoomed way out at a very macro level, and I have my snap turned on, it's only going to allow me to cut at, let's say, the bar. But as I zoom in, and I just hit my G and H keys, so let's say that's only going to allow me to cut at the bar. But as I zoom in further, it's going to allow me to cut on the beat or the half of the beat. So depending on how tightly you're zoomed in is how tightly you can snap. Now there's also some different grid modes. So you may want to, if you find that it's actually kind of jumping around as you move stuff, try setting the grid to just straight grid. And that may take care of the preference if you cut and then it seems like it's jumping somewhere else. So, and then we could do that directly just, where we see our snap go on and off. you can see different grid types. So make sure that you have just grid set. So if you notice that it's jumping around after you do a particular edit, that may help with that. It could be in the wrong grid mode. So give those suggestions a try and let us know how it works out. Okay, so we had a question on, can I explain ASIO guard? So ASIO guard is going to be activated if you go into your studio setup, into your VST audio system, and you have this choice of activate ASIO guard. And what this is going to allow you to do is to basically, when you're running your buffers in different, different projects at different buffer settings, that, sometimes with a smaller project, you can get by with a very small buffer. And as you actually, you do that, and as the project grows, you may have to increase the buffer because you may start hearing some pops and clicks and crackles. Now, the buffer is really critical only on perhaps the file that's being recorded. So if have a project at a low buffer setting, the project can often, it's more critical for recording, virtual instruments for timing purposes, so that you can minimize the latency, or you don't have monitoring latency for someone that, like a singer, or perhaps a percussionist that's trying to get into the groove where they're kind of fighting themselves because what they're hearing is delayed. So what ASIO guard allows you to do is to, on the selected channel that's recorded, that runs at a smaller buffer, and the other tracks on playback are kind of running as if they have a higher buffer setting. I think it's a multiple of 4, if I'm not mistaken. So if you have your buffer set to 256, your other tracks could be running at 1024, so that you could have better performance for the particular track. So in essence, what it's doing is almost kind of a hybrid buffering system, where only the active tracks that you're recording are running at the lower buffer size, but the other tracks are running at higher buffer size, so you get better performance when tracking in kind of critical large projects. So that's kind of the design intention of ASIO guard. So so it's going to allow you to to have kind of a hybrid buffer, so you can have the lower buffers for the tracks you are recording currently, and the other tracks will play back at higher buffer settings. So we had a question of like when the track colors will be implemented, and we get this question almost every hangout. So it's a popular topic of being able to see, like, if we go to, we currently see the track colors indicated below, and I'll pass this on again, but many people, and I know that the developers and planning teams are, understand the desire of people to want kind of that whole color to be throughout the entire mixer channel. Perhaps we'll see it in the next version. I don't know. But I've heard discussions of it, so I'm not sure, when or if it'll be implemented. There's obviously lots of, other things that people are working on, but, we understand the need and desire for that, and I'll kind of reiterate it once again. So, but currently you could have the colors indicated here, and you have different fader cap colors for different types of tracks, and that's how it's assigned. So, but I don't know when it'll be changed, or if there's definitive plans, but generally there's different life cycles for Cubase are pretty predictable. So is how long each, like from a 9 to a 9.5, or an 8.5 to a 9, etc. So we'll see what happens, but that's about all I know. So someone had asked if there was a reference chart to explain the different components. Let's say when you go into the logical editor. So there's sometimes some confusion when dealing with the logical editor on like with a different type of MIDI message, what is value 1, what's value 2. There is a chart in the manual that will go through like for a MIDI note, just a quick rundown. Most MIDI note messages, value 1 is pitch, value 2 is velocity, value 3 is release velocity or up velocity. So with a MIDI controller, you have value 1 is that controller value. So if you have a modulation, value 1 could be the values between, let's say, 100 and 127. So, but there is a chart in the documentation in the Cubase manual that could actually show you, the different values, what value 1, value 2 for different MIDI messages is. So that is in the Cubase documentation, which is installed with the program. You could also just download it from, I think it's a Steinberg help site. So I have it on my Kindle, just, for fun reading before going to bed, try to learn something new. So you could just have it as a PDF file. And if you search directly from here, you could also just, go to the Cubase help, and then you could just go directly to the website. And, so if you just come directly here, you say Cubase Pro 9.5, you can see kind of online plus the English manual. And as we do this, let's say, probably just going to have it download it real quick. We'll just do a quick search for it. So it's probably going to be, let's see if we can just, so kind of definitions of, what each of the inside of different Boolean conditions are. And so you can see here what value 1 and value 2 is for different MIDI messages for VST3 events, pitch bend, program change, etc. So it's in the documentation directly there. Okay, so we had a question on as Cubase is, I'm just going to revert this project so it doesn't sound awful. Give me just a second. About clicking in different spots. And then someone was wanting to click. I'm just going to reread the question here real quick. Okay, so when the person wants to jump to perhaps a different locator, that the playhead is immediately kind of jumping to that particular spot. One of the things that came in handy is you could now just, if you hold down Alt plus Shift, there is some different, if you're playing and you wanted to play from a particular point, all you have to do is so that's one of the options that you have. If you hold down Alt plus Shift and click, that will allow you to navigate. There was a preference that could be tripping you up as well. So if you actually, I think it's going to be under transport. So and it's about, let me just, okay, so locate when clicked in empty space. So if that is active, and let's say if I'm playing here and I click here to zoom, that could actually just kind of jump to the particular area. So if you want that to be independent, where you can say, okay, I'm playing from here, and I want to click here and zoom without affecting where the playback head is, you may want to just make sure that, again, you go to the preferences, that locate when clicked in empty space is turned off. And there may be one other preference, maybe under editing. Let me just check. So check that one preference. I think that's the one that could be tripping you up and causing some issues with that particular function. So again, just go to your Cubase, to preferences, and just simply make sure that under editing audio or transport, I believe, that locate when clicked in empty space is turned off. All right, so we had a question about like tail size on, let me just reread the question. On a freeze function. So sometimes you may have, let's say you have a particular note that has a lot of reverb in it. So I will just add a quick, maybe a piano voice here. So let me just. All right, so let's say I have a piano voice here. And let's say I just had a lot of reverb on it. So let's say I'll go to my effects and let's say here I just want it to have just a really big reverb. And let me just find the large Viennese concert hall. Okay, so we'll go to our mix here and set our effects in. So as we listen to this, we can just have it be a really long reverb. I'll just run it. Let me just run it through. See if I get the, or I'll even try delay here as well. Let's just go ahead and, okay, we'll do something really obnoxious like that. Sorry about that. All right, so I'm going to just draw a note in. we'll just draw a very short note in. So even though we just play one note, that sound will last longer. You know, what happens a lot of times is when either doing just freezing a particular instrument, what the tail size allows you to do is, even though this sound, if we listen to it, last to about there, this note may last directly only this far. So if you add the tail size and say, you know, give me 2 seconds of reverb. So let's say if I'm here and what I want to do is now we'll just kind of resize this particular part. Let me set it up to correct sizing here. So if we have kind of a large reverb on a particular note here, so, and if we wanted to, what the tail does, I'll show this with kind of the render in place. So we'll just say render in place, and I'll just go to my render settings. And this is the same concept, even if it's, you know, with the freezing track. So I could render it as one event, and we'll have the tail size set to 0, and I'll say render. And, you know, what it's going to be, the tail size can actually just accommodate just that. So what I want to do now is when I go to my render in place, and we get to the render settings, we're going to say, let's add, you know, 2 seconds. So as I click on render, it's going to take the length of that note and increase it so that when we listen to it, that the tail of the effects is automatically accommodated for. Whereas not including the tail, in the size options, not including that, would not really convey the a very accurate representation of what the actual sound was. So that's why you have different size options when you go to freeze different instruments. So if I just wanted to come here, so when we wanted to freeze that particular instrument, that's why you could accommodate the tail size there. Okay, so we're going to go through some more questions. Thanks, everyone, for great questions coming in. Hope everyone's learning a couple things. Also, if anyone's watching this, probably should have mentioned this in the front, but if anyone wants to keep like a running index of topics, that would also be helpful that we could post. So you can say at at 1 hour and 15 minutes, we talked about tail size for rendering tracks and freezing, stuff like that. So that'd be super helpful for people watching afterwards. Okay, so we had a question just on explaining different automation modes. So let's take a quick look at our automation modes. So let me go ahead and just kind of, we'll open up our fader. Let me just kill my divide track list function here, so we'll make this a little larger. One of the questions I get a lot is, you know, people are like drawing in automation and they want to be able to see the waveform beneath it, and it's actually just a quick show data on tracks. So a lot of people, I've had people incredibly frustrated that they couldn't see the automation as they were drawing it in. So if you hit F6 and open up the automation panel, you could just click here and say show data on tracks, and then you could see the waveform directly underneath. So let's say if I'm here, let me just delete a couple of let's say if I have some existing automation, there's some different modes of automation. So you can place it, and you could have, you know, the default mode is going to be called touch automation. And this, let me just, will allow you to kind of write. So if I just wanted to automate, I click on W to write the automation and R to read the automation. Now, one of the things that people often kind of freak out about is, you know, let me just, I'll just do a quick write, and let me just go directly back to my automation settings here so we could see the waveform. So a lot of programs can work a little differently than Cubase, and Cubase actually kind of mimics the behavior of consoles. So if I wanted to come here and adjust the automation, and I'm going to make one other change here. We're going to just turn off virgin mode automation. So a lot of times people will want to do a quick automation bump. So when they let go of the mouse, they want it to go back to the previous value. So one thing that, you know, but there's no automation value down the line. So what a lot of people end up doing is you want to just kind of put in a quick automation point. So if you wanted to just kind of come here, and if you do a touch automation, it'll go back to that particular value very easily. So, you know, so if you have a value for it to return to, now there's some great kind of workarounds for this. So that's kind of what touch mode allows you to do. As soon as you're, and we'll get into some of the other functions here. So as soon as I move the parameter and I let go of the mouse or the, it's going to go back to the previous automation value. As soon as I grab it, I let go, jumps back to the previous value. So that's what touch does. Now, what we could do if we're in auto latch, it'll kind of stay at that value until I stop. I let go of the mouse. As soon as I stop the keyboard, at that point, it's going to stay at that particular value. We also have kind of a crossover automation. So if we go to your crossover point here, what this will allow me to do is if the automation's at a particular point and I want to do just a quick bump, as soon as I get back to the original value, it'll just kind of punch out. So now some other things, you know, some people will also put the automation mode, you know, into trim. So if you kind of activate trim, what this is going to allow you to do is to, as you just kind of lower it down, we can kind of attenuate the automation. And then those automation changes will automatically kind of carry over. And there's some different functions here where you could say, if you get to the functions, you can say freeze trim automation on selected tracks, and that will coalesce the automation. Now, a lot of people want to maybe just take one little particular phrase of automation. So let's say you just wanted to take a particular phrase here. You could just kind of grab that, and I'm just going to take it out of trim mode here real quick. We'll just bypass trim. So if I just wanted to attenuate some automation graphically, Cubase 9.5 has added some great functions where you could just, or even the other versions, you could actually just select the automation range. And if you go to the center line here, you could just attenuate the automation, or you could tilt it. So it's going to go up or down, and you could just kind of attenuate just like that. But even if you have like a particular value here, one of the cool things is, you could add just by going to the range selection tool, and then you could just put in kind of 4 points of automation like so, which was a little more convoluted before. But now you could just kind of add particular 4-point automation and say, oh, this word needs to be up a little bit. Or if I just wanted to take one, I want to take this particular breath, or this had a plosive, and I just wanted to bring that down. You could select with a range and then just move the center line like so. And the other cool thing that people wanted that we added in 9.5 was the ability of kind of, once we have that selected, and I could go to my range, once I go to my object selection tool from the range tool, we could just hover over different parameters here, or you could just do different curve types just like that. So very, very easy to, so if you have an existing automation value, and a lot of people use kind of trim mode for consoles, but you could also just kind of select that and just move the center line down, and then you could just attenuate and boost, but still kind of keep the relative automation values within your project, directly there for you. All right, so I'm seeing someone logged in from Texas, from Austin. And someone else mentioned that they're late and they have a question. So if you have a question, just kind of type it in the comments field. We're just kind of going through some of the comments that were sent in. Okay, so we had a question about the tempo detection. So let me just open up project. That we could do some tempo detection on. All right, so let's say we don't have a particular tempo in this project. So if we listen to this, it has no correlation between the tempo and the click track. So I turn on my click track here. So again, the click track has nothing to do. And the question was dealing with how to what the smooth tempo function is. Let me just kind of reread it to make sure I'm going to actually answer the question. Okay, so when using the tempo detection, the smooth function is always kind of grayed out. Is that normal behavior? So let's go ahead and show you first what we could do with this. So if I wanted to, let's say I just wanted to go to my overhead drums, and I'm going to go to my project menu to tempo detection. So as we do this, we're going to do just a quick analysis of the tempo. So, and now it's kind of made a tempo map for us. And I think what the smooth tempo is if there's kind of extreme tempo changes that it may kind of kick in, but I think that's pretty normal behavior for that to be kind of turned off, because you could do some other functions with this particular window open where you could select a particular tempo range and then click on smooth tempo. So what we've just done is, it's placed it and it's figured out what the tempo is, but we're also in kind of a 1/4 meter. So let's find our downbeat. Okay, so it's going to be kind of, we want to look at this. We'll just kind of blow this up just a little bit. So I'm going to switch my tools here to my draw tool. And we'll just put in our 4/4 time here. So and what it's done is automatically done the tempo detection for you. And if we want to look at the tempo track, and now with like the Cubase tempo stuff that you could do, in 9.5 you could actually have different types of meters as well. So if I wanted to come here to my 4/4 meter, I could change the click pattern. Or just so I think it's pretty normal to have. So if we stop this, we go to the tempo detection. Sometimes if the program doesn't catch, and there's always like subtle improvements in the tempo detection functionality. So let's say if I just wanted to jump back a couple steps. So it could be, I believe that if certain projects, if it sees that it needs to be kind of smoothed out, if there's a tremendous amount of fluctuation, that you might be able to click on the smooth of the parameter. So I think it's pretty normal behavior. So once you see the tempo detection, for the smooth to be kind of disabled until it's needed. But I'll do a little more research on that, because I've never really had the need, because the algorithm kind of keeps improving over time, where it hasn't had to be kind of smoothed out. Okay, so we had a question about like setting up headphone mixes for people. So let's say we have this scenario where we have drums, piano, bass, and saxophone, and we wanted to set up headphone mixes for the different people here. So I'll just turn off my click track. So I'm going to go to kind of my full screen mixer view here. And then what we want to do is go to the racks here and make sure that the Q sends are part of the racks. And now we can just come right here to our Q sends. And let's say I wanted to set up Q sends, and this we can do kind of our VST connections. So what I'm going to do is, or in Cubase 9.5, it's been kind of retitled as Studio Connections. So I'm going to open up the audio connections here, and you could right click and add like 4 different cue mixes. Okay, so let's say here I want it to be drums, bass, piano, and sax. Okay, so we have our 4 cue mixes set up, and once we kind of relabeled them, what we want to do is to now assign these to an audio interface output or to a headphone connection. So if I wanted to come here, I could just say, you know, I go to my Steinberg UR44 and I wanted to use outputs 2L and 2R, and that's feeding my headphone output. And I could do that directly on my audio hardware setup. So my second headphone output is going to that. I could also take other outputs and feed it into like a headphone distribution system, whatever. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select all of my tracks in the project. And I see my control room active on my mix console here. So I could, if you don't see the control room, if you click on this little icon here, where you see like the little line to the right, that'll open up the right-hand side. And I'm going to right click in here and I'm going to say all cues. And first thing I want to do is to activate the cue sends. So I'm going to turn it on for all of them. Right click again. I want to use the current mix levels because often what we want to do is to set up a more me headphone mix so the saxophone player could hear themselves louder, the bassist hears themselves better, the drummer can hear themselves better, etc. So we're going to now copy that mix over to all the different tracks, and I want to also copy the current pan settings. So as I do this, I could say if I move this line over to the right, that would send more of the high tom. Oh, let me just. Okay, I'm just going to filter out a couple channels here real quick. I'll just filter out my input channels from view. Okay, I left out a couple of tracks here. So I'm going to do kind of the same thing again. So all cues, activate. Then all cues use the current mix levels. And let's use the current pan settings. So as I adjust, like let's say I go to my bass and I wanted the bass to be sent more to the drummers, I would just move this over to the right. So if the bass player wanted to hear less kick drum, I would just simply go to the kick drum and turn that down in the bass player's headphone. So what I can do now is I'm going to take all of my kicks here. And let's say like all my drums. And then I'm going to activate the quick link. And now what I do is I just simply send more of the drums to the drummer's headphones. I go to the bass. We send more bass to the bass player's headphones. Let's find our saxophone. Let's say our piano. Piano player wants to hear more of themselves in their headphones. And the sax wants to hear more of themselves. So in our control room, we could actually, when we come here, I could listen to my main mix. And let's say we go to our drum mix. So at this point, you could actually just switch between your different cue mixes. So this is more drums. And you could actually just simply switch between the different cue mixes that are active here. So let me just take the talk back off of these. And then you're able to kind of just simply switch between the different cue mixes here. So that way everything can be kind of set up exactly as you expect it to be directly there. So that's how you can set up different cue mixes for different people, just using the control room and using different cues here in the mix console. All right, so we had a question about navigating the different divide track list functionality. So let me just, without using a mouse. So we'll show you this here real quick. So let's say I have a ruler track on top. And I wanted to have a signet, let's say my saxophone. Sorry about that. Let me just scroll down here. And I wanted my saxophone to be on top. So one of the cool things that you have in Cubase is a divide track list, and it's a very subtle icon right here that allows you to do a divide track list. So if I wanted my saxophone to be on top, and let's say I wanted to add a tempo track here. So you could have different kind of tracks on top from the bottom. And you could also, if you just kind of right click, you could just kind of, let me see if I can find where the option is. If you click on toggle track list, that will jump that particular track from the top to the bottom. So if you right click on a particular track and toggle it, that will kind of flip it from the bottom. So I think the question was how to navigate without using the mouse. So I think if you have a particular track selected, and I'm perhaps misunderstanding the question, but you could just see the different types of tracks by using the arrow key down. And let me see. But I think you may have to, there may be a keyboard shortcut. Let me just see if there's a key command for this. So I think it could be activated, but you may have to click to activate. So if you wanted to see, to kind of click in that particular division point. So if you always wanted to see just your, and you could use your mouse scroll wheel to say like, okay, I want to see my arranger track and my tempo track and this, and see all those particular tracks, just kind of navigate. So I'll look to see if there's a keyboard shortcut. I don't know of one other than by clicking with a mouse. But if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.net, I'll see if I could dig around and see if there's a keyboard shortcut to navigate. Just trying different modifier keys. Yeah, I don't know of a keyboard shortcut that'll allow you to kind of jump between the two. So you may just have to kind of click on the active track with the mouse. Okay, so we had a question about I think the looping and editing. I know I'm kind of going through the list here, but I think we may have covered that already. If not, just let me know. So we had a question on kind of can you go a little more in depth on Very Audio? So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Just activate this particular project here. Okay, so within Very Audio, we have like really pretty compelling vocal tuning capabilities. So let's go ahead and take a look at now. You could do Very Audio from the editor here. Often it makes a lot more sense to see more of the screen. So what we want to do is go to your Very Audio editor. And I have an analysis done, but if you don't have an analysis done of the project, you can just kind of come right here and just choose pitch and warp, and that will do an analysis of your audio file here. So let's go ahead and just kind of take a look, and we could zoom in and out. So Very Audio is really designed to help with vocal tuning, and it's an integrated tool, so you don't have to record in real time to another program. You don't have to, like a lot of workflow nonsense. So we'll show you some different modes. Now, there's two different modes to Very Audio. There's pitch and warp and segments. And the one thing that people miss all the time is how to switch between these, because they're constantly going here to do different types of edits. And you just hit the tab key to simply switch back and forth between those two. So let's go ahead and just take a listen to our vocal phrase here. I'll just go ahead and listen to it in context.
You stare at the ground, not a sound. Tell me why.
So let's say we wanted to do like some really easy correction. So if I was going to do it at a very kind of macro level, I could select all the files here, and then you'll see, like, if we listen to it, this is without any correction.
You stare at the ground,
It's maybe a little flat.
sound. Tell me why.
All right, so what I like to do often is, just come here, select particular phrases, and now we could just quantize the pitch. And that will move it to the closest pitch, just like that. So now we could listen to it.
You stare at the ground, not a sound.
Now, while we're in kind of pitch and warp mode, you could also, let's say if I didn't have these notes quantized to the pitch, a lot of times people will just, and we'll kind of zoom in here just a little bit. So let's say I'll just zoom on these particular notes. So let's say just these couple notes here. And there's one modifier to be aware of. So a lot of times you could actually, so it'll break it apart by segments, and you could just kind of have it. And it seems a little silly at first that sometimes if you see a note a little flat, you just kind of want to nudge it up, and it actually kind of nudges it up, but still it'll nudge it by like one semitone. So if you hold down, like on my Mac, the control key, we'll just undo that. That will automatically snap it to the next pitch so that its center of pitch will be there. If you want it to automatically go to the closest pitch and not for it to move up a semitone, if you go into your preferences and under tool modifiers, under editing to tool modifiers, and when you go into let me just find it here real quick. The edit pitch warp tool. So here you could actually just choose to have like no modifier if you wanted to. So you could see if you didn't want any pitch shifting, or if you wanted this. So you could switch those around if you wanted to. So if you hold down the shift key, if you wanted something to be like ever so slightly out of tune intentionally, that would allow you to position it freely. Nothing allows you to move it up a semitone, and holding down, I think it's Control on Windows or Command on Mac will allow you to have it shift diatonically. Now, at times, often what you see is singers kind of scoop into a note and scoop out of a note. So while in pitch and warp mode, if you double click here, you could actually create an anchor point. So at that point, you could just say, I just wanted to bring that up a little bit here. So at this point, let's just double click. We'll create our anchor point, and I could bring that pitch there. Now, if we wanted to adjust kind of the vibrato, if it's a little too wild vibrato-wise, we could just quantize. So we can quantize the pitch to make it in tune, but we could also just straighten a particular note out. So if think of it as the center point of the audio was a little too erratic and a bit all over the place, we could just choose to straighten the pitch to kind of minimize that. And some people use that for a particular kind of like auto-tune style effect. So if you wanted to take a couple of notes here and completely straighten the pitch, so, you could do that for effect. You could also just kind of come here if you wanted to, while in pitch and warp mode, you could do stuff like, you could do, make it sound like Alanis Morissette if you want. And there's also different segments mode. So segment mode will allow you to, now we could take our individual segments, and if you wanted to, just move them around. So if you have, like, let's say one particular note that was just kind of hanging by itself, you could say, okay, let's just take this note and I wanted to elongate a particular note. You could do stuff like that as well. And as you work with this, you could just say, let's just take this note and stretch it out. So if the singer was running out of breath here, I could just, while in pitch and warp mode, I could just make that longer. Or if I wanted to make that very short, I could just come here. Or somewhere in the middle. Also, you're able to just, if you click on the center, you could mute a particular note to see what it sounds like. Now, you could also use MIDI input. So if you wanted to just click on MIDI input, I have a keyboard here. It's probably going to set it to the wrong octave. But at that point, you could also just hit a MIDI keyboard and set the pitch that way if you wanted to, or if you wanted to, be able to even convert this into different MIDI notes, we could extract MIDI directly from here as well. And the beauty of this is, if you've done all sorts of edits everything ties directly into your edit history. So if I just wanted to, again, go to my edit history here, we could just, go back to all of your pitch shifting that you've done in your particular project and see everything. So that's kind of the beauty of having it integrated into the program so that you can handle all of your vocal tuning directly in the program. And one of the things that's very helpful, even if you're not a musician and you have, let's say, the chord track, and this is an important thing that you could do with the chord track. Let's say we'll blow it up here, and we go to our pitch and warp. We could actually base the colors of the notes. So a lot of times, the colors may kind of look like that based on the event or just auto, but we could base the colors on a chord track. So a green note falls within a chord, a blue note is within the key, and a red note is out. So if I move this to a red note, that would be out of key. So the colors can indicate to you as well what pitches will actually work for your particular project. So that's some of the cool stuff you can do with the Very Audio editor to really help craft your vocals. And the processing sounds really good. So there's a lot of wonderful things you could do with that. It's a great feature in Cubase. Okay, so we have a question. Only selected tracks are recording. What did I set up incorrectly? Let's go to your preferences. And I think if we go to project and mix console, there's a preference here under editing, project and mix console, enable record on selected. You could have it for the audio track or for the MIDI track. So you probably have that function set up accidentally, that preference. So again, just kind of check out your project and mix console under editing and make sure that enable record. And this can be done independently for audio and MIDI tracks, that you could just simply have that turned off. And I think that will solve the issue for you. All right, so we got a question. Is someone's having, a lot of CPU spiking? And one of the things this was suggested just right after is the most common thing to do is to raise the buffer size of your audio interface. So if you want to do that, what you could do is you go to your device menu. In 9.5, it's called the studio menu. And previous versions, it was device setup. It's now been retitled studio setup. Select your audio driver here below VST audio system and go to the control panel and try raising the buffer up there. And that'll probably get rid of clicking, popping, and CPU spike. So as your project grows larger, you may have to raise the buffer. And often it's not as critical during mixing. And if you run into issues if you're tracking after a lot of tracks and a bunch of MIDI has been recorded, that's when the ASIO guard settings, also in the same area, can make a big difference as well. So if you just kind of click here, make sure that you have the ASIO guard active, and that will help. Sometimes it could be different background processes. Updating your video drivers can have a good or bad effect. So there's a lot of culprits to that. But, first thing I always would suggest is to increase the buffer size of your audio interface. And again, that's, and if you're running out of CPU power, you think a little prematurely, that's a great place to start with. That'd be like the first thing, that's kind of DAW 101. So, but check that out, and that'll probably help a lot. So someone else mentioned having the, CPU spikes. Again, definitely kind of raise the buffers, and generally, like I think that the ASIO guard is kind of, and I know we covered this probably a little earlier before the question was asked, but you could try to set it to normal is the default mode. You could also try to make sure that you have the multi-processing active. Sometimes having your processing precision at 64-bit could add a little more CPU drain. So, see if running at 32-bit makes a difference, but the ASIO guard will definitely help. You start with normal. You could try high, and you could see if that makes a difference for you. All right, so I see a question. Is there a micro tuner in 9.5? So, you could, as you're kind of playing back, let's say an audio file, you could transpose. So if you wanted to go up from the info line, so this is a semitone. And if you wanted to do kind of micro tuning, this is what the fine tune is here. So this is a semitone and this is a cent. So you could go 100 cents before you hit a semitone. So if you wanted to come here, so if you want to go halfway in between or halfway down in pitch versus... So if you wanted to do kind of micro tuning, you could just do it in real time directly from the info line from any track right here. So just select it. So the regular transpose is in semitones. The fine tuning is in cents. So I see a question: is it possible to put third-party instruments in Media Bay? So yeah, as long the preset management is going to all be handled through a lot of VST plugins from companies still aren't VST3, but VST3 would kind of have all the preset information, and you could see third-party plugins definitely in your Media Bay. You could have preset list for your VST presets. Not all plugin companies kind of confine to that or comply with that or support that. Often this question kind of gets to where you go to your media and you see your VST instruments. And here you currently can't see any third parties. These are just your Steinberg instruments that you see kind of generated here for this. But, your presets, your VST presets, track presets can all be accessed directly from Media Bay for your third-party instruments. And again, not every company a lot of companies have their own independent preset naming schemes, so those won't show up. But, this graphic list here is going to be just for Steinberg instruments as it is currently. I pass that on as a feature request. Maybe we'll see it in the future. I don't know. So. All right, so just seeing a comment, someone was mentioning that when dealing with USB audio interfaces, that they had better luck with their UR824 with a USB 2 port than a USB 3 port. I kind of use mine interchangeably between different USB 2, USB 3 ports. Sometimes different chipsets can make a big difference. But a lot of times, you could experiment with that. That's a great point to mention to people. Sometimes using USB audio interfaces, switching to a USB 2 versus USB 3 port can make a difference and can have an effect on performance. All right, just going through different comments here. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. So we had a question. Who is the female vocalist on this example? I don't know who the vocalist is. I got this project from my friend Vince Melamed. He's a longtime Cubase user and just a wonderful songwriter. And he's, toured and performed with, the Eagles and Bob Dylan and Jimmy Buffett and Roseanne Cash and Dan Fogelberg. He's just a really wonderful songwriter, musician, great guy. So sometimes I get some of my projects from him. I think he told me what the girl's name was who sang, but he comes up with these great demo projects in Cubase, and he's kind enough to let me use them for demonstration purposes. But I don't know her name, but I could find out. And if you want to, I could get in touch with Vince on this. And if you want to know, I could dig into it a little more. If you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.net. Okay, so I see a question. What's the best connection type for audio interfaces, FireWire or USB? It used to be that, FireWire is kind of, going forward for computing. There's not a lot of computers are coming with FireWire. It's kind of, technology that's been, that's not employed or not used as much. I still run FireWire interfaces in my personal studio. I have two MR816 CSXs, the Steinberg interfaces, which I love. I realize that probably my next computer that I get won't have FireWire. So, USB is more, it's in kind of in the name, the universal part of it. So, if I had to choose now to be working, sometimes I like to purchase my gear thinking very long term. So if I could have a piece of equipment that'll work, for the next computer I know will definitely work, and not have to try to buy a FireWire PCI card or something like that. So USB used to, USB 1 was much slower bandwidth than FireWire. And then, FireWire got updated to FireWire 800, and that was faster than FireWire, but USB 2 for getting the amount of audio in and out of most common systems works pretty well. So you could do 32 tracks of recording pretty easily. Not all USB interfaces have that many inputs. So, if I had to choose, I probably wouldn't invest in a new FireWire interface. I would get a USB 3 or USB interface or a Dante based interface. Something like that would be a little more future proof, I think. All right, so we had a comment. Speaking of feature requests, can we have something that's a little less gray? Someone called it gray base. So there's a number of different colors and different optimizations that people often don't employ. So if you go here to the preferences, if you really want to go crazy with different preferences. If you want to see less gray, if you come here, we just go to the Cubase preferences, And there's a lot that are kind of underutilized. And some of the things that came in 9.5, when you go to the user interface, you could have different color schemes. And these can be any color that you want. So, if you want to go to the user interface settings, so different color schemes. I like my editor background to be a little lighter than the default. Your different track types, you can again choose any color that you want. The different fader colors you can pick, so different rack colors, the colors for your channel strip. There's also different event display options. And one of them that's kind of interesting that I see, there's one that I stumbled across the other day. I've seen some composers using, so there's a lot of, when you kind of come to different tracks, you could also have the colorized track controls. This is one that a lot of composer people are kind of using, so that you could have this, but so you can really custom, so that the entire track is the color that you've chosen here instead of gray. So there's a number of, different coloring options. I save a preset before you start, because sometimes you may go crazy with different event display options, and then go, oh, I just hate everything. Like the default MIDI editing, while a lot of people have it very gray, I like to see the contrast. I don't have very good eyesight. So I like this to be brighter, like previous versions. So if I was to change that, again, I would go to like preferences, and think when you go here to the editor background, so you come here. So if I want it to be kind of very dark, I could just come here. I personally don't like that as much. Some people love it. I like that to have more contrast for me. So there's a number of different ways to currently, change different colors for the user interface to your liking that often aren't explored. So check those out, and you could really kind of customize it for how you want it to appear, and have a lot of contrast between it. Just reading a question about amp simulators. Thanks for all the wonderful questions, everyone. So we just commented someone was having a hard time recording with different amp simulators, and then when they switched to 64-bit, that they got better results. So I'm not sure from the question if it was perhaps more of a latency issue that was the issue, or just kind of was it the timing or just sound quality. So doing the 64-bit processing, can have a discernible difference in sound quality. So maybe if you could clarify a little bit down in the comments field, and as we get there, we could, we could determine if there's maybe a latency issue, or because there's some different tricks you could do to minimize the latency with, ASIO guard and stuff like that. So someone had a question, we're in discussion with our audio interfaces, what about Thunderbolt? So Thunderbolt's a great option. It isn't as widely supported on Windows as it is Mac. What could be really interesting is like, some USB-C interfaces, as they start coming out. I'm sure that they'll start coming out, in the near future. So, Thunderbolt, there's already a lot of computer companies that make hardware that are kind of migrated. Like my MacBook Pro is all USB C, and while I could get a USB C to Thunderbolt or Firewire or USB 2 or 3 adapter, I think that could be a direction that's interesting as well. So while there's some Thunderbolt audio interfaces on the market, there's, it could be, a situation similar to Firewire where it's kind of popular for a while and then the format kind of disappears and you need all sorts of weird adapters to, to use it. Okay, so we had a question if there's a way to navigate between different tabs in the channel editor. I'm just going to reread the question. So let me just open up the channel editor. So if you just kind of hit the tab key, will allow you to kind of go between the different tabs. And let me see if there's another modifier key. To navigate between the different tabs here. So tab will get you to the main sections. So I don't know. There may be a way of doing it, but to me, I think you could just kind of go between like the inserts, channel strip, and like sends just by hitting the tab key. But I could explore if you wanted to check back with me at Club Cubase at Steinberg.net. I'll see if I can dig up for a way to navigate quickly between those. All right, so I see someone using Alt arrow, so let me try that. I know that we could do that in the main screen here. So if I have this and we tab, so there's probably a way. I'm just having a brain cramp on it right now. Sorry about that. Okay, so it's just seeing a question. Anything new about the um, Cubase not showing the master mixer on the console, even though it's set up in the, we see it on the project window. So let's see if we could recreate that. Go to new project. So one of the things with, I think it was 9.5. Now, when you start, you could have like your outputs automatically on your main project window. So if I go to my mix console here, I'm going to choose to filter out my input channels. Okay, so I can see my stereo output, my stereo in. All right, so let's say if I wanted to add do say 24 tracks. And let me just, I'm going to just go to my audio connections and let me just change my outputs here. I'll just switch this to one stereo out for now. And let me just turn that off so I'm not double bust. Sorry about that. So it looks kind of like it's, I'll just do that one more time, but I haven't seen or heard about that. I don't, but we'll say I'll create empty. I can see my inputs and outputs, and I'll filter again my inputs, and we should just see the one output there. So we'll just say there's our output. I'm going to add, let's say, 32 tracks. All right, and if we kind of scroll all the way, it looks like the master fader is there. And if I wanted to go to my channel visibility, yeah, and we go to the zones at this point, we could have this fixed on the right hand side. If I select, let me just come here to my input outputs. I'll just click that so it's always anchored on the right hand side like that. So it seems like it's working for me. I am running the 9.52. So if I'm misunderstanding your question, just chime in the comments field later. So someone asked to about some famous musicians that I've helped over the years. I've been incredibly fortunate to help like so many wonderful engineers, producers, musicians. So over the years, I've done stuff with Stevie Wonder. I've helped Paul McCartney. I've helped, become good friends like Peter Frampton. Uh, you know, I'm lucky enough to know Hans Zimmer. I've gotten to hang out with Harry Gregson Williams. Different composers. Mark Mancina, who is my son. I have a 4-year-old son, and his favorite movie in the world is Moana. So knowing the guy that wrote a lot of the music for that has been great. I know a lot of people in Nashville. Chuck Ainley, Gary Pachosa. So it's always humbling, and I find that the people, that are really do incredibly, amazing work are always, so humble. Chuck Ainley, Joey Misculin's a wonderful musician. He's Riders in the Sky, but does all his stuff for Pixar. So just countless others that I've gotten to hang out with. You know, Eric Johnson, Alan Holdsworth was a real joy. I got to help Jeff Berlin, who is my idol when I was a kid as a bass player. So I've gotten to help a lot of different people. And it's really gratifying to be able to help them realize their creativity. Phil Ramone was also a joy to work with. You know, so all sorts of great people. I've been very, very fortunate. All right, so we had a question. Can you use multiple USB MIDI interfaces simultaneously? And this could vary depending upon the computer platform that you're on. The Mac OS allows you to have something called aggregate drivers, and this would allow you to basically, and it could be created in the audio MIDI setup. So if you go to, and this is different than Windows platform. So if you go uh, to utilities, and one of the things you could do is actually when you go to your audio MIDI setup on Mac, and I can't really show you on a PC since I'm running on a Mac, but you could create an aggregate device, and that would allow you to have multiple audio interfaces. I believe that it does still compound the latency, so that could be a bit that could throw some people off. On a Windows platform, you could kind of run one USB interface generally. Some interfaces, I know like my MR816 CSXs, I can stack together and kind of run them chained together. I think that might be a limitation of USB by design, or I haven't seen an interface that does it. You know, sometimes different PCI interfaces, you can chain multiple ones of the same to get more inputs and outputs. So that's something as well. But generally on a Windows platform, it's hard. I know some people will use like an ASIO for all driver, and then you could have multiple interfaces, but it could be a little sloppy for timing and clocking. So on the Mac, you could do it through an aggregate device, but again, I believe the latency is compounded. And on the Windows, you'd have to use it through like an ASIO for all. So if you want more, you know, inputs and outputs options down the road, you know, you could try to get a USB audio interface that actually has the capability of enough inputs with expansion through like ADAT light pipe ports. So like I have a UR824 interface as well. So if I wanted to, I could take my two MR816 interfaces, which have an, you know, 8 analog ins and outs, and I could connect the inputs to the ADAT outs, and I could get 24 channels that way if I needed to. But generally on Windows, it's a little tricky. You have to use the ASIO for all driver, which would allow you to use different interfaces. It's not the most reliable. And on the Mac, you'd have to use the aggregate. But again, the compounded latency could be an issue. So there's a question: have I already done a video on Elastic and Elastic Audio? There are a couple that use it. So there's one video in my Q&A series. I think it's in the first one called like tempo warping. Uh, so that's one you can check out that uses the Elastic a lot. So we'll show just a quick thing on elastic tape. So we had just to show that. And someone mentioned we did that just a couple of hangouts ago. So we'll just go ahead and show how to do like an elastic tape to kind of do like almost like a very speed style effect. So let's go ahead and we'll just do that again for people's benefits. So let's say here I have just a quick classical thing. So I did a tempo map of it already. So what I want to do is, as I want to come here, we could select different algorithms for doing various time stretching. And the algorithm I'm going to use, so there's kind of standard, and these are like from SX3, I think. So we keep them in for compatibility's sake. And there's also elastic. So you have time that's going to be more probably for more rhythmic elements like drums, percussion, guitar in certain examples, maybe piano. You have pitch, which is going to be more, set up for, vocals, and tape. Now tape's kind of the interesting one because as I wanted to come here, what I could do if I wanted to just select, we'll just take my tempo here. And I wanted to, first we'll just select all these and we have them all in tape mode. So I'm going to select and I'm just going to tilt the tempo to slow it down. So this will mimic an analog tape machine. All right, then I'm going to make sure that these are all, before we do this, they need to be in musical mode. That would help. All right, so now when I come here, so as the tempo slows down, the pitch would slow down just like an analog tape machine. So the pitch would change just like kind of analog tape machine would. So just a question, is there a way to determine the pitch from a sound file? So let's say if I just wanted to go to like a monophonic part. And again, if I just come here, let's say I have my bass part, I could just go to pitch and warp, and that will give me an idea of the pitches. If I just undo my bad tempo editing here, so now if I come here, you could just simply come here to the pitch and warp. I know people do this, and we'll say, oh, this is the main note, so maybe that's the key of the song, and you could see the pitch, often from a vocal, and determine the key that way. But sometimes just playing it on, you have if you hit Alt K, you have a virtual keyboard, and you could, hit the pitch and play the note until it sounds the same to you as well. Okay, so I'm seeing a question like when rendering a MIDI track, both are shown, and maybe a toggle switch would be helpful. I'll show you one thing that perhaps a lot of people don't know. So let's say if I have a instrument loaded up, All right, so we have our instrument loaded up, and let's say I'll do some 21st century composition here. So if I have like some MIDI data here, so I know some people when they do this, you know, in their playback, that they don't want to see the MIDI. So what you can do is if you do just a render in place, if you have the track selected, there's an option where you could say, okay, I want this as one event, and then uh, you could remove the source tracks. So if you select the track, you get these two options at the bottom: disable source tracks or remove source tracks. So if you're very confident with that, you can now just say render, and then the audio file will just automatically get rid of the MIDI file and replace it. And I think you can undo it as well right after the fact. So maybe instead of having a toggle, so what most people do is have the MIDI track, and then if they select the event, do a render in place, that at that point it'll render directly below, which makes sense, and then mutes that event. And that's kind of the default behavior. If you wanted to go back and say, oh, you know, this note needed to have a higher velocity or change the pitch, and then you could re-render it if necessary. So we'll see if that's what you meant by the question. So there's a question: is there any facilities to share custom color templates? So a lot of times, you know, coloring templates that have been saved can be, you know, stored within a profile. I can see if we get kind of I'll see if we can get a repository or like a place maybe where people can upload, you know, different user color preferences. I know a lot of composers will exchange, you know, they'll go through, and instead of having 16 colors, they may have like, you know, 128 different colors that they've created. So if you go here, you could, you know, customize and append a new color, and then, you know, customize it as you want, or tweak out an existing color. But I'll see if there's maybe a way that we could have kind of like a repository or a central place where people could share that information. But I know a lot of composers will share their colors just as a separate template. And then once that color is in there, I think you could, at that point, you know, save the current set. So a lot of people will exchange colors by, you know, just sending over a project or a template and then saving those as a preset on their system. So that's another way you could do it pretty easily. Okay, so we have a question on what causes instrument changes. Um, so sometimes, and a lot of times, you get this with a MIDI file. So one of the things that you may want to do, and I see, I'll just reread the question. So it looks like you've gone through and done that. You know, a lot of times a MIDI file may have like program changes embedded in the list editor. But check also, you know, if it's dealing with MIDI files, what you may want to do is there's a preference, and this is missed by a lot of people. And if you deal with MIDI files, it could automatically import like and go to a Hallian Sonic SE. So if you go to your preferences, and then under MIDI to MIDI files, you know, you could just, instead of going to Hallian Sonic SE3 multi-timbral or to instrument tracks, try just choosing MIDI tracks and see. If you wanted to email me one of your files, I could see if there's like hidden program changes somewhere. Sometimes, you know, it can be almost, I've seen sometimes where some MIDI files will have a program change that's on a part below the MIDI part, like they're stacked. So you may select a top layer and that doesn't have a program change, but maybe the layer underneath does. I've seen that in some instances, and that can really throw people off in that scenario. But if you want to send me a file, but check that preference again under MIDI files. So if you go to preferences here to MIDI file and try having it go to MIDI tracks and see if you're dealing with MIDI files, if that takes care of it for you, or if that exposes when you go to the list editor the program change or bank change message as well. All right, I've just been accused of being a name dropper, but you guys asked, so. So we had a question if there's any changes to the sampler track. You know, I'm not sure if there will be any in different maintenance releases. And you know, someone wanted to particularly slice audio, but a lot of people, and it may not. You know, I can see where some people may not, you know, feel the need for it because, let's say, if there's, you know, because Groove Agent does it, I know that you may want to do it directly inside, you know, but you know, within Groove Agent itself there's already slicing capabilities, so it may be duplicative. But I understand the need of why you may want to just do that whole workflow paradigm within the sampler track, so I'll pass that on as a feature request. And so, but I haven't heard of any plans, but obviously every new version adds new functionality to the sampler track. So, I think it's, you know, there'll be new things coming. I'm not sure what specifically will be in there. All right, so I see a comment on the UR824 that you can run 3 at the same time. With the UR824, you could actually run 1, and then you could run 2 of them as like as an audio converter into it. So just for clarification for people who are on the stream. Okay, so is there a key command to open an effects plugin? I'm pretty sure there is. Um, so if we have inserts, let's say we have multiple inserts going on. You know, a lot of times, you know, inserts and sends are treated a little differently with this. So it's kind of, let me just add a send effect here. So I'm not sure if it's a key command, but I think if you go to inserts, let me just see if I remember. So if you just click on an insert, that will open it up. And I'm trying to remember, there's a key command to double click and you could open all the inserts on a particular track. Let's see if I can remember that combination here. It might be from the mix console. Let me just try. Trying to remember what, but if you hold down, if you just double click on that, that will open up. If you go to sends, I think it's not a double click, but it's like a alt. But let's just look through the key commands real quick here. But there is, and I'll figure it out probably right after the hangout. But there is a way to open up all the inserts on a particular track. It's just eluding me. I'll play around with that if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.net. I'm just trying to remember what the key command is, but there is a way to, like, you double click on one insert and all the key commands, all the inserts in that particular track will open. Let me try just one other setting. And maybe it's... there it is. So Alt-Shift. It's not a key command necessarily, but if you come here, so if you click on the edit with Alt-Shift, just from, let's say I have this closed here and I have inserts here. There's 3 inserts. Click on the edit with Alt-Shift. Then all the inserts will open. And let me see if there's Command Shift will close it. And there's probably one for sends as well. I'll see if I can find it. If you want to email me, I'll play around with it tonight because it will be bothering me that I forgot. So we had a question. I saw if the hangout started early. We started at 1 o'clock Eastern, and depending on where you're at, different countries go to daylight saving time at different times. So if you're in a different country, it could be perhaps that daylight saving time kicked in on America last week. I know I had one trip to Europe where I flew through London. There's a daylight saving time switch in England. It happened when I was coming back in Germany, and then a week after in the United States. So if it's an hour off, it could be because of daylight saving time. So. So there's a question, can you take this, the info line and change the pitch? If it's just like an audio file, I could take this audio file here, and let's just say, I'll just play this particular file. You could just change the pitch, and of course I have now horrible. So if I just want to come here, you could just change the pitch of any audio file. So if it's coming from a sample pack and it's inside of a sampler, you may have to, at that point, you may have to change it within the sample playback. But if it's just an audio file, you could do it straight from the info line. And you could also do that for MIDI parts too. So if you just have a particular MIDI part, you can transpose directly from your MIDI, from the info line there for MIDI. So we had a question again about exporting a QuickTime with the audio. So for those who have followed this, there's a new audio engine that was incorporated last summer. And with that, it's, they're still working on the exporting option. So I'm sure we'll see it in the future. It's a very common feature request. So. Okay, so you see, is Steinberg working on a function to duplicate a MIDI pattern equal to bar in the editor? So let's take a quick look and okay, so let's say we have a bar like this. So I think you could just, I'm not sure, if you just hit Command D, you could duplicate that part. If you have, and maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but I think you could just, Command D to duplicate the part, just like that. So you could just have the bar. and we kind of got into this, and if you use kind of the in-place editor, so let's say if I just have this MIDI part here. So what I want to do is to, let me just come here to my, let me go to my track control settings real quick. All right, so if we go to your, and we kind of got into this a little bit earlier, we covered this in one hangout. So if you have your in-place editor here, and let's say you wanted to just grab the range tool. So if you had that, so, you know, before, if you duplicated the parts, they eventually kind of get off because we duplicated the notes and not the range. But if we go to the in-place editor, and there's, I forget what the keyboard shortcut is for that. So now I could select just the range, and I could duplicate the range just like that. So you could duplicate the bar and not just the actual events, but just do it through the in-place editor. All right, so, you know, I see, you know, if Cubase should have a formant editor because it doesn't have it now. So when you kind of come here, you know, you could play around with some of the different elastiques. So you could, you know, preserve formants here, right there. So some of the different algorithms will preserve formants. All right, so see, someone wishes cool to have Hallion or Cubase, you know, sample external tools. So you could do it currently in Hallion 6. Is, you know, it's like, dare to believe it's a software sampler that samples. So as soon as you go to Hallion here, you could just add the track, and then, you know, there's different kind of window options that you can have. So, you know, basically all you have to do is take any external instrument and at this point you could just, you know, Hallion is set up to sample. So you could just kind of come directly here, and once Hallion is open, you could enable the sidechain, and at that point all you have to do is take, you know, any of your external MIDI or audio and then simply send that directly to the sidechain, and you could sample directly inside of Hallion 6. It's a great distinction. All right, so we've gone a little over 3 hours. I have to go wrap up so I could actually go pick up my son from school. If there's any just last minute super quick questions, please feel free to ask them. If not, we'll wrap up. So we'll see if there's any quick questions that we could answer quickly before I head out. All right, so we got just a quick question about doing deleting a part with the range tool. Is that destructive? No, nothing is ever truly destructive in Cubase. So you could always undo it. So you just select a range of particular tracks, hit delete. If you hit the right key command and go back later, boom. And even if you got to the point where you did delete a range, the underlying audio is still there the same way. So. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I'd like to thank everyone for the wonderful questions. If you liked the Hangout, please feel free to subscribe to the channel and to like the video. And if you want to send questions for future Hangouts, please feel free to send them to me at clubcubase at steinberg.net. I hope that everyone has learned a couple new tips and tricks and that you found it helpful. If you want to go back through, if you're watching it a second time and want to keep notes of an index, it would be so helpful for people to be able to have a quick index of the different topics that were discussed. I want to thank everyone for the great questions. We'll see if there's any last minute quick questions before we wrap up. All right, so we'll see. I think we'll probably try to do it the first week in April for the next Hangout, but we hope that I had a great time doing a Hangout. So great to have people from all over the world, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.